acknowledge the harmful legacy created by colonization and the railroad industry in this region. And we aim to support, along with our partners, California Native American tribes by uplifting tribal connections and relationships to land through meaningful consultations with tribal government and engagement with tribal communities. And the GRTA and SCC will work collaboratively with California Native American tribes, residents, landowners, businesses, community-based organizations, as well as government partners to co-create and oversee this trail network. So a little bit of background. The operation of the Northwest Pacific Railroad ceased in 1998. The line was embargoed because it was so damaged. And so about 20 years later, in 2018, there was a feasibility study that was ordered by Senate Bill 1029 that directed CALSTA, or the California State Transportation Agency, to do an assessment of the old rail line and its rights of way and see if it would be feasible to convert it into a long distance trail. And so based on that study, it was found that it was feasible, and the GRTA was created in 2022, and Senate Bill 69 directed the Great Redwood Trail Agency, or GRTA, to pursue rail banking and prepare a master plan for the project. So now going to the next slide, where we'll start from the left and move to the, start from the right and move to the left. We're in the orange box right now in terms of our process. We're working on a master plan. And for the last year and a half, 2 years, we've been talking to the community, engaging with tribes, doing a series of community meetings to really flesh out the recommendations of the master plan. And we released the master plan in early April out to the public for public review. And we're accepting comments until early June on that. And in conjunction with the master plan, we're also kicking off a program, environmental impact report, that will look at the impacts, high level, of the proposed trail, provide analysis and disclosure according to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. Throughout the whole process of everything to do with the Great Redwood Trail, we are engaging with the community and tribes, and really want to hear from you and what you think is important in this project. And so after the master plan and the program EIR are adopted, then there is some construction of the trail happening already, but really then that will kick off planning and design of segments of the trail, which is how any long distance trail generally gets built. So there will be partners, local partners, hopefully tribes as well, that we want to work with to raise funds for design and permitting and construction, as well as O&M. And so the planning and the design and the permitting is the first phase. And during that phase, we'll really look very closely at cultural resources, environmental, sensitive species, native plants, species of concern, and all of the sensitivities that need to be looked at before trail can be built. So on to the next slide. Now,
Lisa, it looks like it might not be advancing for our view. We just got the initial title slide.
Which
I think it's just showing the title slide for everybody here.
Oh gosh. Thanks, Hannah. So the whole time it hasn't been advancing.
While we're taking a moment to troubleshoot that, I have enabled the closed captioning so that for folks that are having trouble hearing, you might be able to have subtitles. Is that working for everybody? And if not, you might have to enable them on your own. On the bottom bar of your Zoom, you can go to more, and then it'll give you the option to have closed captions, which can help.
So, oh, okay, I just had to click it. Okay, so now you get to see. I'm sorry that I didn't realize it wasn't advancing because it was advancing on I have two screens, so. And we're happy to share this as a PDF afterwards, Josefina, so we can send this out to people. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties.
That's
on
totally
my-
fine. The presentation looks great and I'm excited for the rest of it.
Okay. So, and certainly, Hannah and my contact at Elaine Hogan, the Great Redwood Trail Agency Executive Director's contact, will share with you at the end. So please be in touch with us if you have any questions or would like a copy of the presentation. This basically just shows you what the schedule has been with the master plan. But let me just go back. If this will work, I'll see if no, it doesn't. It just goes forward. So here, a sec. Okay, well, anyway, so after the design, I'm just going to talk through the slide, even though it isn't exactly the one we have up. After the design is complete, construction can begin. And then after the trail segment is complete, then operations and maintenance begins. Throughout the process of the master plan and the programmatic EIR, we are working closely with tribes and engaging with the community to really do our outreach, build consensus, refine some of the concepts, review and have the public review the document, comply with CEQA, and then adopt the plan and the programmatic EIR at the same time. So I'm going to turn it over to Hannah now, and she will walk you through a little more about the master plan.
Thanks, Lisa. And yeah, I saw some comments. Definitely, Josefina, you can share that probably the PDF is going to be most accessible for folks that we sent you earlier. So feel free to share that out with folks that registered or however you distribute to this group. Because definitely, I know I like to go back and look at all the slides once I've had a chance to process stuff. But thanks for coming along so far with us. So Lisa was describing the master plan process and the sequence. I'm just going to share a little bit more about the elements of the master plan so that if you want to engage more or deeper, you can go to our Great Redwood Trail plan.org and actually page through the document itself. You can look for certain chapters that are most interesting to you. You can even use a search tool if you're looking for keywords that are something that's in your focus area. But overall, the master plan is intended to be memorable, respectful, inclusive, responsible, and enduring. And right now, this is just a draft master plan, so the comment period is still open. We really do encourage folks to go and take a look through. You can submit your comments online, and there's multiple formats in which to do that. We'll talk more about that at the end. But just again, memorable. We want to make sure that this is a trail that will be a legacy project and that will create unforgettable memories by connecting people to landscapes, offering a variety of trail experiences, and telling the story of the people and natural resources that have shaped and continue to shape the region. Respectful, of course, the Great Redwood Trail will be a good neighbor and work to maintain respectful relationships with California Native American tribes, adjacent landowners, and the local community that the trail connects. Inclusive, so inclusive of the ideas and the neighbors that we talked about up above, and thinking really strongly and strategically about partnership and collaboration so that this trail is of the community and therefore best for the community by being reflexive and responsive to those needs. And then being responsible, that's again, being part of that good neighbor and enduring, which I think for this group, but maybe most interested in terms of thinking about 30 by 30 and how the Great Redwood Trail will protect and enhance the surrounding natural environment and advance conservation and stewardship on public lands. So looking for opportunities to restore fish passage and promoting leave no trace practices and a few other things I think Alicia will talk a little bit more. Next slide, Lisa. So there's 7 different chapters within the draft master plan. I again encourage you to go and peruse them, and I'm going to go through just really quickly, just high level about a little bit of each, so that if one is piquing your interest more than the other, it's easier for you to go and find that chapter that's posted online. Next slide, Louisa. So in our chapter 2, which is tribal and community engagement, we talk about not just the types of engagement to date that we've done, which includes, some of the really early outreach, which was letters to all the tribes within the project area on the Native American Heritage Commission list in December 2022, but also presentations to different tribal groups, webinars that we held for California Native American tribes, specifically on the GRT, one-on-one outreach, which is definitely ongoing, government-to-government consultation, which we intend to be ongoing throughout the lifespan of the trail. Same thing with the one-on-one outreach, workshops and presentations at tribal offices, and tabling and presentation at events. And so again, this is just the types of engagement to date. You can read a little bit more about engagement in chapter 2. And throughout that engagement process, from what we heard and in working with tribes to reflect back what we heard to them and work through some recommendations, we've developed about a dozen recommendations that are really high level based off of the feedback and information and input that we got from the tribes that we were working with. And these really do focus around cultural resource protection, opportunities for tribal stewardship, restoration, and co-management along the Great Redwood Trail. And those are all on page 51, just as a summary table, and then also incorporated throughout the master plan through the different sections and topics that are related to those high-level recommendations. Next slide, Louisa. And then some of the types of wider community engagement events that the master plan team has conducted to date include 6 in-person community workshops in Mendocino and Humboldt counties, 3 virtual community workshops, 2 last year and 1 just last month, and then lots of tabling at tribal and community events, and then presentations like this, right, where we're working with special interest groups that might have a particular focus, meeting with stakeholder groups, in addition to tabling at these larger community events to try and get input and feedback and engage folks from the wider community. Next slide. And so those last 2 were really chapter 2. So if you want to dive in deeper, see what some of the stakeholder groups are thinking about, see all of the different events where that happened, you can go in chapter 2. Our next chapter, chapter 3, looks at existing conditions. So not just physical and environmental constraints like geomorphic conditions, but also historic rail infrastructure like bridges and tunnels, hydrological conditions like rivers, streams, and the wild and scenic river designation of the Eel River. And specifically for that one, it's a recreational designation along the main stem of the Eel River. Also looking at those existing and planned Great Redwood Trail segments for any folks that live in Humboldt County. Most of the existing segments are around Humboldt Bay. There's also a portion in the town of Blue Lake. And if you're coming from Mendocino County, there's a section in Ukiah that you can go out and walk already built. And then we have some others that are already in some of the initial planning stages, but there are lots of the Great Redwood Trail that are unbuilt and potentially haven't gone into a detailed planning quite yet. And then the last couple of categories for existing conditions that will be examined in the draft master plan at a really high level, and then would be on a more minute segment by segment level in future planning would be things around land ownership and management. And then real banking status is also covered in this chapter of the draft master plan. Next slide, Louisa. So trails, all of those existing conditions really help to inform what type of trail design is going to make most sense for a particular area. And then that paired with the expected trail use or the desired trail use from the community. So thinking about where does it make sense for it to be a backcountry trail, which is typically narrower and a natural surface. And you can see in the map, and especially for those folks who love maps, this will be something to peruse in the PDF that Josefina sends out later on. You can see in these more remote sections, backcountry trail is being recommended in the master plan. And then when you get closer to more populated urban areas, like around Humboldt Bay or near Willits and Ukiah, you get to see more of that paved multi-use trail, which is wider and has more of this opportunity for diverse types of users. So thinking about more cyclists, pedestrians, hikers, wheelchair users on those paved areas, and depending upon the segment, also opportunities for equestrians too. And then kind of the intermediate is the crushed stone multi-use trail, which is more of an aggregate, and that's your sort of middle ground. So something that's a little bit more firm and typically wider than a backcountry trail that you find in some of those areas that are in between the more populated areas and the more remote sections. Next slide, Louisa. One of the things that I love as somebody that loves to look at maps are all of the corridor concepts. And these are for sections that are not yet built out. These are just, again, a preliminary idea that shows opportunities and also constraints along the Great Redwood Trail corridor. So looking at those existing conditions and thinking about, where's a tunnel that's intact? So that means that it'll be a lower barrier for building out trail, or maybe there's a place where there's a bridge that might have rotted out its historic rail infrastructure that needs attendance to. Also, opportunities for trail-related development are pointed out in a lot of these places. So thinking about things like community gateways and trailheads or campgrounds, and each of those have been just really conceptually mapped out, thinking about where would it make sense to have these amenities to help increase use and access to the trail, and also to help boost just the trail user experience. And that's for both locals in their community making best use of this public corridor, and then also for visitors to the region, thinking about those amenities that help to drive economic development in smaller communities. So I was talking about this a little bit, thinking about trail towns, right? This is something where when you look at completed, fully developed trails like the Appalachian Trail on the East Coast or the Pacific Crest Trail that are also long distance towns, or even for places where there's maybe not a super long distance trail, but they have trails and are, a recreation-based economy in that local area. We think about what are those things that help to drive economic benefits for the local community. And those might be just getting locals out in the community more often, creating active transportation networks, but then also thinking about tourism opportunities for trips on the trail. So, and one of the appendices is the economic benefits analysis for the whole Great Redwood Trail. That's part of the master plan here, and expecting that when this trail is complete, there would be annually over 6 million trips, and more than 33% of the trips would be from trail visitors outside the region. So still seeing 2/3 of the users having that local benefit, and then paired with that visitor use or from people getting out in their local communities, looking at for that entire Great Redwood Trail corridor, $102 million in total benefits annually. And so that's through things like recreation and tourism, health benefits of getting folks active and improved community health, as well as transportation benefits. So saving those car trips and increasing active transportation. And then for the recreation and tourism, I like to think about things like, where are folks going to get their food? Are they renting bikes? Are they just being able to come and support local artist industries? There's a whole slew of rentals, lodging, restaurants, and retail that go into this economic benefits analysis. Lisa, could you go to the next slide? And so again, some of the things I'd already kind of talked about, thinking about this trail as an opportunity to bring more focus to these areas, and working with local communities to find, what are the things that they want to see more in their neighborhoods, and how can having the trail go through help to uplift those opportunities, both for the local benefit, but then also to bring in tourism dollars as well. Next slide, Louisa. And I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. So this is a repeat of a slide that was part of the slide deck, but you may not have seen because of the lack of advancing. But mostly what this slide serves to share out is that we are initiating in the middle of a scoping period for the program environmental impact report, and that tomorrow night there is a public scoping meeting where you can provide comment, either written or in person, and that scoping period will continue through the end of this month. And I will, when our presentation is done, I'll drop a couple of links in the chat. So if you want to sign up for that scoping meeting and come tomorrow night, there will be a link to register for that meeting. And as promised, here is Elaine Hogan. Couldn't be here today, but she is the executive director of the Great Redwood Trail Agency. And I'm Louisa Morris. I am a project manager for the Coastal Conservancy for Mendocino and Trinity counties. And Hannah Barty is the project manager for Humboldt County.
Great. Thanks so much, Louisa.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience with my technical challenges.
No problem. It happens to everyone. Alicia, are you ready to take it away?
I am, yeah. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep, I can see it perfectly.
Great. And just want to do a check too if people can hear me okay. Some general thumbs up. Yep, awesome. As Josefina said, my name is Alicia Heyman. I'm the director for Friends of the Eel River. Just a little bit of background on Friends of the Eel. Gosh, I'm so washed out at this time of day. Thank you, sunlight. We are a 30-year-old environmental nonprofit working for the recovery of the wild and scenic Eel River, its fisheries and communities. And we have been engaging on trying to get the mess of the railroad cleaned up for about half of the time that we've existed. It's been about a little over 15 years, I think, that we've been really engaged on this issue. So I'm going to start off today by giving just a brief history of the railroad, how many of the environmental harms were surfaced, the litigation that we and others engaged in, and then kind of the state's response to that, and then finally talk about the opportunity that this trail presents for remediating many of these issues. Thank you to Louisa and Hannah for kind of orienting people so that you're all familiar with, where the old railroad lies and where the right-of-way is. It was constructed between 1906 and 1914, and basically from the beginning, disregard for both environmental and cultural heritage protections were abundant. If the railroad needed to cross a tributary, they'd just throw some dynamite at it and block up the fish passage. There was a lot of railroading, if you will, that was going on in terms of just, kind of paving over a lot of problems. The issues with geologic instability were also present from the very beginning. In fact, the inaugural run of the railroad or of the line was delayed by a significant landslide. And so there was this whole big golden spike ceremony that got delayed until pretty late at night because the railroad couldn't go through this slide right away. So from the beginning, I think it should have been present or pretty clear to everyone that this is just not an appropriate place for a railroad. So and I'll just add to that too, that maintenance of this line was at times the most expensive of any line in the entire nation. So it really just underscores like what a significant problem it was. And I think because of those maintenance costs, we saw a lot of cutting corners, a lot of like gravel and debris just kind of shoved into the river. And a lot of that stuff remains there today. So the line was having a lot of economic problems, and the state legislature in 1989 established the North Coast Railroad Authority, or the NCRA. But then by 1998, the Northwest Pacific Railroad became the first railroad to be ordered closed by the Federal Railroad Authority. There were more than 208 damaged areas, and this included violations of fish and game code, health and safety codes, and water codes. So a lot of pretty obvious violations. So some nice photos of all the junk that we see in the river these days. In the late 90s, environmental a variety of agencies, the State Department of Toxic Substances Control, Fish and Wildlife, and gosh, I think the North Coast Water Board as well, all started investigating the poor environmental conditions on the line. And ultimately, they also established that the NCRA was failing to comply with those previously mentioned codes and with a variety of environmental regulations. So this all resulted in a consent decree in 1999 in which the agency basically promised to take specific measures to protect water quality and to clean up toxic spills. There is a really long list of things that the agency was required to do per that consent decree. They were supposed to stop throwing all kinds of trash into the river. This included like literal trash, bottles and cans and things like that, and up to things like oil and other petroleum products. They were specifically ordered to stop polluting in a wide number of ways. They were ordered to remove railroad debris from the river and up, past the high water mark, a certain amount, within a period, within like 6 months of the consent decree being issued. And I have to say, anyone who's been out there since that time can see that many of those things, like I said, remain in the water. They were required to establish plans for managing hazardous waste. They were required to get permits anytime they were going to block fish passage, important tributaries, and some of these things were done, but many of them were not. And then ultimately, as part of trying to rebuild the line, the NCRA they ultimately asserted that they could operate outside the regulations of CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, because they argued that they were federally preempt. And by that, I mean, because they are a railroad, which is subject to federal regulations, those federal regulations take priority over state regulations. And so they argued that, that they actually didn't have to follow state regulations because of that. So that's where we come in. In 2011, Friends of the Eel River, along with Californians for Alternatives to Toxins, filed parallel cases against the North Coast Railroad Authority. And this was largely over their failure to comply with CEQA, but part of what that accomplished also was exposing this this attempt. Like, one, they some CEQA documents were changed throughout the process to indicate that the agency actually had no intention of rebuilding the line, and that was part of why they didn't really need to follow quite so many regulations. But our litigation exposed that intention did still exist to rebuild the line, and also a likely plan to partner with the operator on the line, the Northwest Pacific Corporation, to facilitate shipping gravel from a gravel mine in Island Mountain area. And so, ultimately we ended up in the California Supreme Court after several years of litigation. And the justices there decided that CEQA does actually apply in this case, which was a little unique. And it was because the NCRA was a state agency and because the line was a state-owned line. If it had been like a private railroad, a private ownership or a private operator, then that might not have applied. So we got pretty lucky, and then this case prompted the California Transportation Commission to order the NCRA to prepare a shutdown plan, basically in light of their, I think the CTC put it that they had negligently used state funds. So we were all pretty excited about this, that the agency would kind of be stopped in their tracks, so to speak. Gosh, it's amazing how many railroad puns you can use talking about this stuff. But then the state was still left in a position where they had the responsibility to clean up this mess. And so then just a little while later, Senator Mike McGuire introduced legislation to shut down the NCRA, railbank the right-of-way, and begin establishing the trail. And I might actually be like combining two pieces of legislation to explain all that. There was SB 1029 and then SB 69, I believe, which Hannah and Louisa covered. But yeah, so that kind of brought us kind of to where we are today. And that is with this opportunity to really start start the process of addressing a century of harms that were committed against the river. So broadly, the opportunities that I think groups like Friends of the Eel River are really excited about are the chance to address some of the fish passage restoration that exists still. You'll see this map that I have up here. I've got the main stem of the river circled here. This is from the Department of Fish and Wildlife's Fish Passage Assessment Database. And you'll see there's lots of little green circles, which are good news. They're places where either there was thought to be a barrier and it was assessed and it's fine, or places where barriers have been, I think places where barriers have, been remediated. But you'll also see a couple of those scary red squares, and those are where the barriers remain, or places where we really don't have a clear picture yet. So, groups like California Trout, for example, have done a really excellent job of targeting some of the high priority fish passage areas, as well as like the ones where there's willing landowners. And that's really the key reason why the trail is so important, is because the Great Redwood Trail Agency is a willing landowner, and the right-of-way that the state owns gives us access to what otherwise would be private property. And not every private property holder wants these wonderful environmental remediation projects done on their property. A couple of the other, kind of big picture items that we have to address are cleaning up hazardous debris. One thing that really sticks with me, and I think you probably saw it in some of the pictures throughout this short presentation, but is just how physically dangerous some of that debris is. Many years ago, I was on a rafting trip and we high-sided on a rock, but it was a really non-treacherous area of the river, and the boat captain kind of wanted a little more flexibility to be able to deflate the side of the raft and kind of get us moving again. And so he suggested, well, why don't you just hop in the river and float downstream a little bit? And it was kind of in a place where it would be relatively safe for me to do that. But then fortunately, one of our friends was in a kayak just downstream from us, and he was like, whoa, please don't do that, because there's a whole bunch of sharp, jagged metal, maybe a broken culvert or some some rail or something. But he was like, you will get cut up pretty severely if you get in the water here. And I always think about that as yes, Friends of the Eel River, our priority is making sure that the habitat is healthy and productive for fisheries, but we also want it to be safe for people, and it certainly isn't with all of that debris in there. And then of course the thing that I think is really kind of an understated opportunity for remediation is cleaning up toxics, both those that are directly associated with the railroad, past oiling stations, potential creosote. There's a lot of places where various petroleum products were used, to lubricate the rails or to do descaling on, timber products, and we're just kind of like dumped. So I think there's a lot of assessment that needs to be done to determine where those priority spots are and how to deal with them. But then there's also the opportunity that this right of way gives us in being adjacent to former mill sites. We can kind of peek under the rug, if you will, and do testing on the right of way that will inform us about how bad the pollution is on those former mill sites, and then use that information to hold the current responsible party on those sites accountable. So it's really an opportunity to clean up more than just what's right on the right of way or right in the river, but kind of like spread that around, if you will. So yeah, I think I covered it's a unique opportunity because of that access to what otherwise would be privately held property. And then I do think too that there's something to be said for leveraging the unique power of a state agency. I've been working pretty closely with the GRTA staff and some of their board members. They are very small and fledgling. What you see here is the majority of the team doing the work. But I do think that, having the power of the state agency is something that's unique, and something that, certainly small organizations like Friends of the Eel River don't have access to. It provides, I think, a different set of opportunities for acquiring resources for cleanup. And yeah, that's all I've got for you today.
Thanks, Alicia. That was a great presentation. I learned a lot.
Great.
All right, Nicole, are you ready to speak to us today?
Hey Tanani Sentimal. Heyo, heyo. Sorry, I'm getting an echo here.
Yeah, I'm not sure why there's an echo.
We have two devices going on in here. Give me just one moment.
Gotcha.
Okay. Can you hear me? Will you be able to hear me though? I think if you just muted this side, then it would be okay. Oh, it was, okay. Okay, can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, I can hear you. Do you mind going in present mode, perhaps?
Okay, give me just a second.
You're all good. Take your time. If you can't find present mode, I can also see it. So I can see your presentation. It's just not full screen mode. So either one works.
Yeah, let me see if I can get you. Yeah, just because I'm trying to do a double screen. Let's see. Oh, here we go. I can't without.
So, exit out of that. Okay, so on the bottom right there, there's a little next to the there's a little present there. No, right there. Yeah. So you click more,
Yeah. Well, no, I
and
meant
then you gotta
to.
share screen again.
I'm still sharing.
So stop sharing screen and maybe share it again.
I guess what I could do is just go in here. This is what I was right now. Hope I don't echo.
Echo is
Okay. Hopefully it's not too loud in here, but I'm gonna try from here. No, I don't have the owl.
I don't have to share screen.
Am I sharing my entire screen?
your entire one. So there's two different windows. I can see myself and then your presentation. There you go. That looks good.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, as long as, okay. Okay.
That's perfect.
That's the weirdo looking up. Sintama Kanema, Nicole, Anna. My name is Nicole Whipple. I'm a Round Valley Indian tribal member, and I am a contract employee with Save California Salmon, and I'm here to share some federal trust responsibilities information with you today. I thank everybody for their presentations. Unfortunately, we weren't able to hear Louisa too well, but Hannah and Alicia, thank you so much for all of your information and sharing. A little bit about Save California Salmon. We aim to support tribal and non-tribal communities to engage in public comments related to water pollution, fisheries, and tribal beneficial uses. We are dedicated to policy change and community advocacy for Northern California's salmon and fish-dependent people. So as we know, as some of you may know, that the Eel River is the third largest salmon-bearing river in California. The river flows through multiple counties, over multiple agencies, jurisdictions, and private lands. And to share today, I am calling in from the ancestral territories of the Lake County Homo. I'm here in Nice, California, working with the Terra crew. I'll introduce them as soon as I'm done. Sorry, I meant to introduce them first, but I was running a little short on time. So a few topics I have here under our federal trust responsibilities are, basically the federal trust responsibilities. We have assembly bills and executive orders. And most importantly, as we discuss the government to government tribal consultation period, that in consensus, the majority of our Eel River tribes feel like we have been excluded in this project, which is why I'm here to advocate for our tribal people. And then the consideration of the monuments, easements, and tribal management in this trail process. So as we look at federal trust responsibilities, there was an executive order 3335 reaffirming the federal trust responsibilities to federal two and United States versus Dakota Apache Nation. Most recently, we are aware that
Hey, Nicole, I can't hear you anymore. Is your connection okay? I think you might have gotten cut off.
okay.
There we go. I can hear you again. Did your presentation conclude? I'm sorry, I think we might have gotten cut off at a certain point.
No, it did not.
Okay, great.
Let me try to share. So I just wanted to thank Alicia for pointing out the going over the history of the railroad and the federal agencies. And so that's kind of the point of this presentation, that I wanted to bring in that collaboration of the federal and state as we deal with tribal entities who are federally recognized, and the lands that the trail had originally resides on are federal lands. It is, kind of cohesive that, those are both federal enclaves, if you can say, federal agencies that, share federal responsibilities, particularly as I was sharing in these, you can see in these cases, there's secretarial orders, there are executive orders, and there is federal trust. There is law and case law that backs up the need for tribal engagement. Again, the consensus of the Eel River tribes is that they have not been adequately or meaningfully consulted in this process. So we have, thank you again, Alicia, for speaking on CEQA when dealing with tribes. So as the agency does speak about looking in the future and planning to meet with federally recognized tribes, regardless of the fact that if the funding for this project is a state project, you're still dealing with federally recognized tribal people, and there are still federal laws in place, and those apply to our people and the consultation process. The land is still, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I've asked this a few times and gotten a few different answers. But my understanding is that the railway is still on federal lands, even though it's a state project. Is that correct? Anybody?
I'm sorry, Nicole. No, it's not correct. It's the GRTA is not, and the land is owned by Great River Trail Agency.
I cannot hear you, Louisa. Alicia, can you respond, or somebody that the community?
Yeah, I can repeat what
thank
Louisa
you.
was sharing. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I think it's just a little bit quiet on Louisa's microphone. She was just saying that the Great Redwood Trail Agency is the one that owns the land, so it's state, not federal, for the GRTA right of way.
Okay, so thank you, because I was recently in a meeting with John Hashchak, who stated that the agents, we keep getting these having these discussions where we're told, as the tribal community brings their concerns, we're told it can't be moved because it has to stay within those federal boundaries, is what we keep being told, why we can't come with our comments and ask for our protection of our sites and such. And so even, just recently in a meeting in Round Valley, John had mentioned that it was a federal property and the funding was state. So thank you for clarifying that, because it does make, my presentation a little could be not so fitting for the state part of it, but there still are, as we had spoke about, things like the protection of the river. Our tribal people are federally recognized people who do have federally obligations as far as the trust responsibilities and consultation process, which then becomes a little sketchy. And then as one of the things I would like to highlight is the California Fish and Game Code, which finds in section, oh gosh, sorry, I'm having some difficulties here. So the jurisdiction over the protection and development of natural resources, especially the fish resources, of great importance to both the state of California and California Indian tribes, which is documented in the legislative findings and declarations. Part B says, to California Indian tribes, control over their minerals, lands, water, wildlife, and other resources is crucial to their economic self-sufficiency and preservation of their heritage. On the other hand, the state of California is concerned about protecting and developing its resources, protecting, restoring, developing its commercial and recreational salmon fisheries. So this is where tribal beneficial uses come in. And these are the things that are, as again, the consensus of the tribes and the state. We keep hearing from the state, hearing from the agency that, which I believe is a fallacy. I'm sorry, but I just have to again reiterate, consensually, we do not feel like we were consulted appropriately. And I would have to reiterate that me being in this meeting does not does not mean that this is a tribal consult. I'm sitting amongst 20 other native tribal people here from many different tribes, and we represent the community. We are tribal members, but this does not count as a tribal consultation, so please do not add this as your head count. The state of California has issued Executive Order N-1519, acknowledging and apologizing on behalf of the state for the historical violence, exploitation, dispossession, and attempted destruction of tribal communities. Executive Order B-1011, it is the policy of the state administration that every state agency and department subject to executive control is to encourage communication and consultation with California Native American tribes. Again, just to be clear, when you consult with tribal nations who are federally recognized tribes, you must then, whether this is a federal project or not, you are then dealing with federal governments. We are sovereign federal governments, and you must adhere to our consultation policies. It is not a check the box and account for each tribal member. So while the state may claim this is where it says we encourage, when you are consulting with federally recognized tribes, you must follow those consultation policies under the federal government. Executive Order N-8220, addressing biodiversity crisis, accelerating nature-based solutions, requires inclusive partnerships and collaboration among federal, state, and local governments and California Native American tribes. I would just like to share that in this video. So again, I appreciate Alicia's opening up about speaking about the erosion that occurred with the railroad. This is a picture of Highway 162 that, you know, generally I used to drive every day. And this is the side where the rail bank is. But talking about expenses of the cost of the erosion and fixing the roads on our river, just for us to have a safety to get in and out of the valley, this is what the other side of the road looks like, except for that's where we drive, and that's the only way to get in. So when we consider the protection of our rivers and our fish, this is what we ask, is that you think about, it is important. I'm not saying that it's not important to remove the toxic waste, the toxic things that are there, but you have to also be in consideration, if the ultimate goal is to save the fisheries and to protect the watershed, then maybe building on a railroad such as this one that's here, that you consider those costs, and maybe the priority be, how are you going to get, we barely can get in and out. And this has been going on for years. When you're thinking about tourism and bringing other people in and out, this is what you're going to be looking at. It's all the time. It's not only during the winter time that we have rock slides like this. So I had brought up some of the fish and game codes. And one of the fish and game codes, because again, we're dealing with a river, we're dealing with a wild and scenic river. And I just want to express the importance of the relationship to state procedures and regulations. And, you know, in this section 242.14, relationship to state procedures and regulations, Part A says that state fish and game regulations apply to public lands, and such laws are hereby adopted and made a part of the regulations in this part to the extent that they are not inconsistent with or superseded by the regulations in this part. And this is where I find it, you know, this is where we have this, the barriers come in of understanding and dealing with the federal and the state together, working together. And I feel like it's already come to that kind of space where, you know, at the beginning, the agency is saying, oh, this is a law. This law says that this has to happen. This is what's going to happen. Well, in the meantime, we have law as well in the state and federal area when you're talking about consulting with tribes. We talk about U.S. EPA federal guidance on environmental justice. Executive Order 12898 says the memorandum calls for all agencies to address significant adverse environmental effects on the communities in mitigation measures outlined or analyzed in environmental assessments. Again, this was, you know, the concern of, thank you again, Alicia, for explaining that CEQA is very much important and is inclusive in this project. But again, we still have to look to those other federal regulatory regulations. And also be inclusive of our tribal people, where Cal EPA designated disadvantaged lands, including but not limited to federal American Indian reservations and lands held in trust by the United States for the benefit of American Indian tribes, to be considered in these climate crises. The reason why I brought this portion up is that we have, again, you have to understand that while there is law for the climate crisis, there are also laws that are coming about protecting the ancestral territories and the Aboriginal lands of both federally and non-federally recognized tribes, both state and unfederally recognized tribes, which this trail extends multiple regions. Save California Salmon has been working very diligently with the California State Water Board and in regards to tribal beneficial uses. You know, we haven't seen the agency yet speak on the tribal beneficial uses or to be inclusive of the tribes and the not only the beneficial uses that have been taken away from us because of the railroad system, and then now the lack of acknowledgement of these uses that will occur while the trail is, you know, again, historically being created for use of non-native people. In conclusion, I just have to reiterate again that the consensus of the Eel River tribes is that meaningful consultation has not been met. And I hope to see it, you know, hope that this process can be started over. And the next steps are to reach out to the respected tribes whose ancestral territories are located in the designated trail areas. I am not personally against the trail. I'm here to help. I'm all for seeing our people on the land, being in the river, but I do not feel like this trail fits into the Eel River Canyon in a safe and way of protecting those environmental concerns, both federally and state, as well as the sites, and that it is, you know, the agency's obligation to not exclude those that are not federally recognized, but to have meaningful consultation with all tribes. You know, I'm sitting here in Lake County, and we know that the Eel River is, you know, maybe the trail's not going to go along the river, which reaches into the Lake County, but these tribes are also Eel River tribes, and this was their food sustenance. They traveled on this river and lived off of it, and were taken away from it, just like any of us who are in the trail's way. And so I ask that, you know, the agency consider more protection on the Eel River, and that they acknowledge that in December of 2023, President Biden issued an executive order for the director of the Office of Federal Financial Management and the Domestic Policy Advisor to consult with tribes, taking greater steps towards fulfilling federal trust responsibilities and helping address the needs of all tribal nations. I would also like to ask the agency to be in consideration of, as we are, you know, the majority of us are working on Eel River projects, the Eel River dam removal. We all want to see that happen, and to be considerate of FERC. You know, Round Valley has had many run-ins with FERC, but yet, you know, as much as we, you know, are struggling to work and deal with them and hope that dam removal happens quickly, I have to give FERC props for, you know, for supporting the tribes out of state. And on February 15th, 2024, FERC established a new policy that it will not issue preliminary permits on projects proposing to use tribal lands without the tribe's permission. And while we might argue that these are not in federal lands or state lands, we do have executive orders today in place and laws in place that say that regardless of being in those territories, those tribal trust responsibilities are to be acknowledged. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole, for your presentation, and thank you everybody for staying overtime. We are 14 minutes overtime, so I'll recognize that we don't have time for Q&A. But thank you everybody for being here, and I'll send out the resources from the presenters as well as the recordings soon. Thanks, everyone.